Get it.
Welcome to another episode of Moving Forward Talk with Diana. This platform is open to discuss various topics with the goal to influence others to become proactive and shape their future without limitation. This week we have with us Dr. Alfred Titus. It's a pleasure to have you taking time out of your busy schedule to share with Moving Forward Talk with Diana.
Yes, thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Before we continue, I would like for you to give us a little bit of background, childhood, into teenage years and into your adulthood.
Okay. Well, I was raised in South Jamaica, Queens, a very tough neighborhood in New York City. You know, your typical neighborhood with your drug dealers and your prostitution and all kind of things going on. I was able to maintain a certain balance through all of that, thanks to the impression and the conversations that I had with my mother. So I would spend during the week, Monday to Friday, hanging out in the streets. And on Sunday, I'd go to church with my mom. I was an altar boy and everything. So it was quite a balance, but it's that balance that allowed me to be able to see things clearly, to see both sides of a situation through her constant conversations with me and my sister as well. Um, I decided to go to college. I went to high school and everything, and decided to go to college. Started out, got my bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. Did that for a few years. Realized that it wasn't really what I wanted to do. I wanted to give back. I wanted to be more. I wanted to be part of the community, part of the solution to many problems that are being that I grew up seeing and experiencing with drugs and violence and things like that. So I eventually joined the police department. I did 23 years in the police department, NYPD. Worked my way up from uniform in Washington Heights and Harlem, which is some pretty tough neighborhoods, especially back then in New York City. Became a detective, worked my way up to the homicide unit and hostage negotiation as a hostage negotiator. While doing that, I went back to school on an NYPD scholarship. A lot of people don't know there are a lot of scholarships within the police department, within city agencies in general. Got my master's degree, decided to continue more, got my PhD, and while that was happening, I was promoted within the detective rank. There are different levels. I got promoted to the highest level, detective first grade, at which time, when you get to that level, you are no longer the detective that goes out and does this and go do this and go do that and write a report on it. You're now part of the decision making. You're part of the strategies that are being developed to address the particular crime issue or whatever the case may be. So when that started to happen, I started to see how things are done differently based on the community that the crimes are happening in or the type of people that the crimes are happening to. And that was a problem for me because I joined the police department to help, to be part of the solution. At that point, I began to feel, you know what, maybe I'm really not part of the solution. And this was around the time when Black Lives Matter had first started. This was about 3 or 4 years ago. And I felt like maybe I wasn't part of the solution. And I decided that I'm going to retire. And I retired so that I could give back more to the community on my own. I felt like I'm in a position now to give back without the police department. And so I became a professor at John Jay College, which teaches criminal justice, where I now teach police officers before they become police officers, teach them about what it's like and what they have to deal with and the type of mindset they need to go into policing. I wrote a few books and I started a few organizations, a few companies. One is A Titus Consulting, which concentrates on consulting for law enforcement and private investigation firms and things like that. But in addition to that, I do a workshop called Positive Interactions with Law Enforcement, where I go into communities and teach Black youth or minority youth how to deal with the police, how to interact positively with the police so that everyone can go home safely, the police as well as the youth working with the police or dealing with the police in car stops and street stops and all of that. I also started a nonprofit organization, which allows me to give back to the youth in general through motivational speaking and empowerment. And I started a college scholarship under the nonprofit to give students, deserving students, an opportunity to have a college education. So with all of that, with my PhD, I've been categorized or seen as an expert in community policing and an expert in certain police topics. So I've been doing commentary for CNN and Fox News and the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. So things are happening. There's a lot going on right now within our communities where my expertise is needed even more.
And I must say your work is very much appreciated. Your contribution to bringing awareness to the African American community and even throughout all communities, especially with what's going on now. So you are very appreciated.
Thank you.
And listening to you, you have an extensive history in law enforcement, criminal justice field. Who or what influenced you to pursue a career in the law enforcement?
Well, it's something that I've always wanted to do, probably even before I realized it. Growing up, I played cops and robbers when I was kids. When I was a kid in the street with my friends, I've always watched police shows. But, I had my favorites back then. It was Starsky and Hutch and Beretta and all these kind of shows that our youth probably have no idea what I'm talking about. But more importantly, I've always wanted to give back. I've always wanted to leave my mark on the world. And I felt being in law enforcement that was my opportunity because growing up, we always feared the police. That was always a fear of people in our community. Oh, the police are coming. So I felt like that was a good place to start, to try to change that and maybe use the authority and the voice of law enforcement to make these changes. And that's what led me in that direction.
And you have served in various capacities as an African American. Discuss your experience with equality and inclusion within the criminal justice system from what you have experienced.
Yes. Well, being an African American in law enforcement, it was quite a difficult road. There were a lot of roadblocks. There were a lot of obstacles, some obvious, some known, some unknown. As far as the racism, it's there. It's just in the air. That's just how it is for the most part. I've had a lot of situations, even with the public, where I've had to deal with racism. One particular situation, I'm in full uniform, and I get on an elevator, and there's a elderly Caucasian woman on the elevator, just me and her on the elevator. She sees me get on the elevator, and she grasps her bag, she clutches her purse and runs in the corner in complete fear. And here I am in full uniform. So she didn't see my uniform. All she saw was a Black man, and she was afraid. So things like that stick in your mind. I've also dealt with a lot of, comments and things said, through from my colleagues and things like that while on the job. But what I liked most about being in this position was that I felt like now I'm on the inside and I'm able to protect people in certain situations. Although I've never dealt with anything physical, any kind of physical police abuse or brutality like the George Floyd situation, I have dealt with situations where, as a detective, the person I'm working with may have been maybe a little too aggressive towards a suspect during an interview, or using racial slurs, where I could step in and stop it and say, no, that's not going to happen here. And I can ask that person to excuse themselves, and I take over the rest of the investigation or the rest of the questioning to make sure that things are done properly. It also gave me the platform to reach the troubled youth, because my interviews as a detective were always different from any other detective that I know. Because at some point during the interview, I would always reach out to the individual and say, listen, what are you doing here? Why are you dealing with these people in the streets? Why aren't you in school? Why aren't you doing this? And I believe that I have reached numerous youth just through that attitude, which they did not even expect. A lot of them were just taken aback that a police officer would even speak to them that way, because they're just not used to that. They're used to just the police department being the aggressive force and not caring about their lives. So I was very proud to be able to be that in those situations.
And with your obstacles, the racism and the unfairness of equality and inclusion, how did you avoid that? How did you avoid allowing that to cripple your career?
Yeah. Well, I've always been the type of person that reaches for the highest point that I possibly can. And although there are obstacles and barriers along the way, I never let anything limit me. So I've been able to push past that. I see them, I recognize them, I go around them, over or under them. But nothing, I've never allowed it to stop me. A lot of times I see it as a challenge. A lot of the officers that I worked with and the detectives that I worked with, they could not understand why I was going for my master's degree and my PhD. And I would explain to them, listen, it's not about the money for me. It's just who I am. I am setting an example for my people, for either my family, I have 3 children of my own, or the people the people in my community, the other African American people, to show them that this can be done. You can not only become an African American officer, a detective at the highest level, and still go to school and accomplish all of these things. So if I can do all of this, there's nothing you can't do. So it's more of an example for me, setting the example that was important for me.
Because we don't allow limitations and we don't allow barriers to win.
Absolutely, no limits.
As a vet in the criminal justice field, what impact do you believe the systematic racism has on African American individuals who desire to become a law enforcement officer?
Yeah. Well, I work with at John Jay, where I teach. There are a lot of African Americans and minorities who originally wanted to become law enforcement, and because of everything that's going on and maybe things they've experienced, they changed their mind. And it's that systematic racism that is keeping our people out of law enforcement. And I'm not saying that it's done intentionally, but if it's being done intentionally, then it's even more reason why we need to step up to the plate and get involved. But let's just say it's not. For argument's sake, we need our people on the inside. The more sergeants, lieutenants, captains, detectives that we have in law enforcement, the more we're going to be able to make these decisions, to set policy, to set procedure that's going to protect our people. And so we cannot let systematic racism stop us, because, I mean, anyone who's African American has been dealing with it in many aspects of their life, not just in law enforcement. So, we have to learn how to maneuver through it while we're fighting to conquer it. So, it's like you said before, no limits, no limit.
And what advice would you give an African American?
Well, I would give them go ahead.
Who would come to you and say, Dr. Tatters, I desire to become a law enforcement officer, but when I see what's going on, I know there is no room there for me. What advice would you give?
Well, I would give them the advice, because I get that question a lot, especially at John Jay. I would give them the advice that there is room for you. And if there's not, you make room for yourself. Do not turn away from what your destiny is. If this is where you feel you want to be, if these are your goals and your dreams, and you feel like you can be part of the change, part of the movement to make things better for everyone, not just our people, everyone, then you
Mhm.
need to go ahead and push yourself and work through all of your fears. And like we said before, remove the limits and the obstacles and make it happen, because we need our numbers, we need our representation in law enforcement, just like we need them everywhere else. But we need them right now. The eye is on law enforcement, and we need us there to make the changes that are necessary.
What new training, if any, do you think should be implemented and required for a law enforcement officer prior to and during their career?
Okay. Well, two things immediately come to mind. The first one is psychological training, and not necessarily psychological training. Let me rephrase that. Psychological evaluation. A police officer or a recruit, rather, before they become a police officer, they go through psychological evaluation to see if they're fit to be a law enforcement officer. That has become so standardized that if you know what to say and how to say it, you can get through that. We need additional evaluation on top of that, 1 year in, 2 years in, periodic, to make sure that the officer still has the right mindset to deal with the public and deal with the different communities and cultures that exist in most of our communities. It's very important that they're evaluated more than just that one time. So that's one change. The other change I would do, and the reason I say this is because I've dealt with a lot of police officers from the academy all the way up to the end of my career who have born and raised in the suburbs, and they have never dealt with African Americans or minorities in their entire life. And when they get out of the academy and they are placed in some of the tough neighborhoods that New York City has, like parts of Brooklyn or even Harlem uptown or whatever the case may be, they're in shell shock when they see all of these African Americans and minorities. And a lot of them are afraid. And when they are afraid, that fear is what brings out their aggression. So that's a problem. So rather than us deal with that, because we have police officers coming from everywhere, we need to have more bias training in the police academy, as well as additional training where these officers or recruits spend time in these communities and get to know the type of people that they're going to be working with, so that when they get out there, that fear doesn't overtake them and make them do things that don't fit what they should be doing as law enforcement officers. So it's very important that they increase the racial bias training, and all of that type of training needs to be. We need more of that.
Absolutely. How do you believe the law enforcement officers can improve their relationship within the African American minority communities?
Okay. But that's a tough question, because community policing is the program that's supposed to take care of that. That's the policing strategy that's supposed to be taking care of that. And that's been happening since the early 90s, if not the late 80s. And although it exists, I feel like it hasn't been done correctly, or it hasn't been done, it hasn't been used to the full extent. So what officers can do is continue, and if they haven't already done it, make these outreaches to the community. Um, the police departments need to set up programs where the community can come in and speak to them. They can have more meetings with the community where the community is involved with some of the decision making, with the strategies that are taking place in their communities to address different crimes. But it's also important to recognize that this is a two-way street. The police extending their hand is not enough. The community also needs to embrace that and get involved. Regardless of how you feel about the police, regardless of all of the protesting and everything that's going on, you need to get into the precinct and be able to voice your opinion and get involved with the decision making that's being done to your community. These officers come and they police your community and they go home to theirs. This is your community. You should be part of the decision making. You should be part of the strategies that are being developed to police you and your children. That's important. You know, you need to be part of it. And a lot of times our communities shy away from the police. I don't want anything to do with them. I'm not going in the precinct. Next thing you know, I get arrested. Or, you know how people talk and think, but you have to move past that and you have to get in there and get involved. Go to your local precinct. Listen, when is the next community meeting? I want to be part of this. And then you get to the meeting, you voice your opinions calmly, you know, and you get involved. Maybe you join the community board if that's what you have in your community, and just be part of the solution. So it works both ways. The police, they're outsiders and they're coming in, so they have to reach their hand out to you and get to know you as a community. But you also have to be willing to accept that hand.
Absolutely. And you spoke earlier in reference to one of your initiatives in teaching individuals how to positively interact with law enforcement officers. And as you can see, sometimes it really gets out of hand where it becomes aggressive. As a teacher, or as a professor, and your student comes up to you, or it could be anyone within a neighborhood just comes up to you and says to you, I fear the police. I am scared that even if I'm respectful, if I'm following his commands, he might still become aggressive. He might kill me. What do you tell that individual?
Yeah. Well, that question has become tougher as in our current times. There was a time when my answer to that question was follow the directions of the officer, be respectful, and make sure that you get home at night. Because whether you realize it or not, that's all the officer wants to do as well. So you want to get home at night, he wants to get home at night, get through the situation and go home. I used to also add to that the streets are not the place to fight when you're being treated unfairly. If you're being treated unfairly by the police, it does not make sense for you to be all loud and boisterous and arguing with the officer, because he's in control of that situation, whether you want to believe it or not. So quietly, nonchalantly, take his badge number, get his name, and then you can file your complaints later and things like that. However, as times have changed, I still believe the key is to get home safely at the end of the night. Alive, more importantly, but the onus has somewhat shifted to the police, I believe, because a lot of times many of our officers are approaching situations far too aggressively, and that's something that has to be fixed from their end. So as far as that's concerned, all you can do, or all you should be doing, is maintaining yourself. Be calm. Maintain your control. Don't question and argue with the officer, because a lot of these officers, and I really can't say this is a lot of officers, but some officers are waiting for any excuse to add a resisting arrest, or to say he was belligerent and that's why I tased him, or that's why I did this, or that's why I did that. Don't give them the reason.
Absolutely. Is there anything else that you would like to bring to our awareness that I may have missed out on asking?
Okay. Well, yes. What I've noticed over the last couple of months is that, you know, our people are aggressively protesting and changes are being made, which is great. It's great. Laws are changing, especially here in New York. Policies are changing within police departments. They're talking about defunding the police, which only means shifting some of the money, which, okay, I can understand that as well. But what I'm not seeing is our people, our communities preparing for what's next. So we are basically arguing and protesting and kicking down doors. These doors are opening. When these doors open and we get inside, what do? We need to be prepared. I am developing a course, a series of courses that will allow our people to become more prepared for what's next. For instance, we need to own land. We need to not be renting homes or apartments. We need to have our own homes. That gives you a stake. That changes your life. We need to know more about investing in the stock market. We need to find out more about life insurance and how to start a business and how to get scholarships for college. These are the topics that my sessions will be having. I'll be bringing in experts to teach, to talk on each one of these topics so that when these doors open, when we kick open these doors and we're inside, we now know how to move and maneuver to set ourselves up as a people who can gain more respect and achieve the things that we ultimately want. Yes, we want equality. Yes, we want proper policing in our communities and things like that, but we should also want more. And the nation is paying attention right now. So now is the time for us to start preparing ourselves, educating ourselves, educating our children. Now that these doors are open, we can buy homes, we can do this, we can do that, because now there's going to be less barriers. So we need to prepare for that. And that's what I'd like to see happen. And I'm trying to be part of that. And I'll keep you abreast because I want you to be part of that as well. I would love to be one of the experts that that give one of these sessions. But we'll discuss that another time. But we need to prepare for what's next.
One of the best tools we can have is self-empowerment.
Absolutely.
Self-empowerment.
Yes.
What is next on your moving forward journey?
Well, I have a lot of things on my plate right now. I'm working on a few more books, the course I was telling you about. So I'm staying busy, trying to stay involved, trying to make sure that my voice is heard and that I'm part of the changes that are occurring in our community. So you'll see and hear a lot from me in the future. Stay tuned.
Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to enlighten us and bringing us some awareness on moving forward talk with Diana. And as you have stated, no limits.
No limits. Exactly.
We are to prepare ourselves to, and no limits. Because barriers don't win.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome.